This is Mona Tanchev, President of NCSM, and welcome to Learning with Leaders, the Bold Mathematics Leadership Series. Join me as I sit down and have conversations with emerging and established leaders exploring equity in action. You will hear from bold mathematics leaders as they share their experiences and actions and what they have learned from them. We think these next few minutes will help you consider the bold actions that you can take to focus on equity and support those that you serve. Grab a warm cup of coffee and a journal as we learn together on our mathematics leadership journey. Hello, I'm Mona Tanchev, President of NCSM, and welcome to the NCSM podcast, Learning with Leaders. John Sangiovanni and I are the co-hosts for the Bold Mathematics Leadership Series. To finish up the Bold Leadership Series, we have invited speakers to sit down with us and discuss what equity means to them and share with us their experiences and stories of leadership actions that support our journey as math leaders. We have two special guests today, Beth Kobett and Karp, talking about leading strengths-based teaching and learning in mathematics. Dr. Beth Kobett is a professor of education at Stevenson University, where she teaches and supports early childhood, elementary, and middle pre-service teachers in mathematics education. She is a former classroom teacher, elementary math specialist, adjunct professor, and university supervisor. Beth also serves as the director of the first-year seminar program and a faculty fellow for the Teaching and Learning Center at Stevenson University. She is currently serving a 3-year term as an elected board member for NCTM, National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and was the former president of the Association of Maryland Mathematics Teacher Educators. Beth is a recipient of the Math Educator of the Year Award from the Maryland Council of Teachers of Mathematics and the Johns Hopkins University Distinguished Alumni Award. Beth also received Stevenson University's Rose Dawson Award for Excellence in Teaching. Beth believes in fostering a strength-building community, that was a long one, with her students, and strives to make her classroom space inviting, facilitates lessons that spark curiosity and innovation, and invite positive, productive struggle. Karp is a professor in the School of Education at Johns Hopkins University. Previously, Dr. Karp was a professor of elementary math education at the University of Louisville. Her scholarship focuses on the intersection of mathematics and special education. She is the author and co-author of 23 book chapters, 50 articles, and 40 books, including Strengths-Based Teaching and Learning in Mathematics, 5 Teaching Turnarounds for Grades K through 6 with Dr. Kobett. Dr. Karp is a former member of the board of directors of NCTM and a former president of the Association of Mathematics Teacher Educators. Recently, she won the Lifetime Achievement Award for Distinguished Service to Mathematics Education from NCTM. She also is a member of the U.S. National Commission on Math Instruction. So welcome, Beth and Karen. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm reading through your bio, just like, wow, you guys are busy. So let's start with an easy question. How do you guys know each other? How did you guys come to work together on this book or just in the past?
That is such a great question. Well, we've known each other, I don't know, for quite a while.
Long time.
Long time, yes. And
probably through Skip to start with.
Oh yeah, Skip Fennell.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And we used to meet up at conferences and always take a little mini shopping trip here and there to bond. Karen had really encouraged me to get my doctorate, and I had thought that dream had passed, and she really encouraged me / pushed me, and that is, she's a major supporter of that work, that event. And that is actually what also helped us with this strengths, which we can talk about a little bit later, but it really fueled the learning and the development of this whole idea about how to motivate students through using strengths-based practices in the classroom, and teachers as well.
Beth was kind enough to include me on her dissertation committee at Johns Hopkins, and I got to know her work better, particularly appreciative inquiry, which just fired me up the way she presented it. And so the whole strength-based component really emerged from her work and that study. So we've been having a lot of fun with it, to say
I'll have to
Well, I
catch up.
think,
I was gonna say,
I think we want to hear more about the shopping trips
yeah,
as
that's what I
well
want
at
to hear more about, the
the
shopping trip.
conferences, but maybe that'll be episode 2 of this podcast. So speaking of the series, the conversations have been about bold leadership and thinking about equity in mathematics. And so, one of the questions that I have for both of you is, what does equity mean to you?
So equity and really this work is centered in that first step of equity, which is to really think about the fair treatment of equitable access for students, and this idea that not only are we systematically working to provide an equitable learning environment, but we're also systematically working to break down the barriers that are not supporting students to learn mathematics. And those barriers occur in all levels, including the ways in which we choose to teach, tracking, the ways in which we talk about our students, some of the vicious cycles that are just a natural part of school systems just because they always have been, but also recognizing how those vicious cycles, like assessment cycles, where what do we do with assessment? We look at what students don't know. And then we focus on what they don't know. We develop interventions around what they don't know. And we just build and build this deficit thinking. So for me and for us, this idea of equity is, what are we doing that is making sure not the same treatment, but fair treatment, that students are provided the opportunities to learn mathematics, show their brilliance, be recognized for the mathematics that they do know, and then working against the things that are preventing them from learning mathematics alongside their peers.
Yeah, a lot of times people say, well, don't go in with a preconceived notion. We actually want them to go in with a preconceived notion. And that notion is that all kids can handle and tackle challenges, and that reserving them or putting them aside for certain instances or certain children or expectations of perfect behavior is not the right approach. And in fact, it can be just the opposite. And we'll talk more, I'm sure, about that.
I also think one of the things behind this is that every student is capable of learning mathematics, versus this idea that it's elitist or that only a few people can. And that if we have that belief, as Karen says, we make different choices in the classroom if we believe that.
Yeah, so you guys mentioned in your description of what does equity mean to you, this idea of thinking about mathematics through a different lens. So you talked, like I heard you say, the assessment cycle, focusing on what students don't know, and you call that deficit thinking, right? So if we're not deficit thinking, if we're thinking about students, thinking that all students can be mathematically brilliant, right? How does that tie into the strengths-based, instead of the deficit-based, the strength-based approach to teaching and learning mathematics? Because that is not what we've typically encountered in mathematics instruction, right? Or just in my own educational experience, it was always about what I didn't have versus what I did bring to the conversation. So what does that look like? And how does that strength-based approach enhance that equitable teaching in mathematics?
So I think the idea here is to leverage what you do know. So I don't know if you've ever had a conversation where you knew it was going to be a hard conversation and somebody had identified the things you couldn't do. And so the whole conversation was going to be around what you could not do and how you're going to fix it. So once you hear that first thing that you didn't do well, what does the focus become? It becomes you thinking, oh, I got to get out of this, or how do I get this better? And in fact, what we're saying is, let's look at what students do know. Within every aspect of mathematics, there are children, students, adults coming to the math with seeds of knowing, things they do know. And when we sit down and we look at that and we say, well, how can we leverage that and actually think about, well, you know what's really interesting here in this solution pathway? You had a lot of good thinking here. What you did was you had 2 strategies that you used. made a number line, whatever it is that the student did. Now let's take a look at how we can use what you did right to leverage it to this piece to get you to the point where you know the mathematics that we're teaching, or we can help you learn the new mathematics that we're talking about today, the new learning. I think that students feel so much more confident, and we know that they feel so much more empowered by the idea that, wait a second, you're saying I know something versus I don't know anything. And also this notion that everything is either all right or all wrong. You know, we got to work in mathematics to talking about this idea that there's lots of stuff right in math solutions that we can talk about versus not just the answer being wrong. And I think we've been talking about this for a really long time, but I don't think that we've been able to help ourselves and each other and one another and teachers think about, well, let's get down to the nitty gritty. What is it that is correct and where am I trying to go? And really great math conversations come out of these discussions.
The other thing that really can come out, and Beth just reminded me this when she was talking about her examples, are the mathematical practices.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times kids don't really even know that's part of what they're supposed to be doing. But, you know, in the book, we talk about instances of pointing out when kids are persevering. And Beth did some great activities with students to signal to them, you're persevering right now, and this is a really important thing. And so those kind of mathematical practices, this is a showcase for them, and pointing them out and saying, I'm watching you and I'm noticing that you're doing this. And in some cases, we even talk about having other kids in the class notice kids' strengths, and that just turns everything on end. So we just are saying that it's another approach that moves away from the way, as you said, Mona, many of us were reared in teacher education to diagnose, look for mistakes, find misconceptions, see where children are going wrong, identify barriers. I mean, it's just the way we were all taught. And to turn this all around is, you know, something quite different. And that's what we're asking people to at least consider.
Karen, go ahead.
No, go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Well, no, Karen, you strike a note with me thinking that, you know, this notion of we have to fix students, right?
Yeah.
And that there's nothing to fix. We want to take all the strengths they have and help them build upon them, right? And go ahead, Beth. I interrupted you. I know you had something to add there.
Well, I was just going to tell a quick story about a pre-service student teaching middle school math. And so a student said, I just don't get this. I don't understand what's going on. I don't get it. And we had been, you know, talking a lot about strengths and ways to reframe that idea when students say, I don't get it. Karen and I call that CU seekers, or conceptual understanding seekers. So actually that's a brilliant strength to be able to say, this doesn't make sense to me, and actually voice that and be empowered enough to say, this doesn't make sense to me. So she stopped and she said,
and I wanted to. That's the underline, right? And I wanted to.
And I want it, right. So she said, thank you so much for letting us know that this didn't make sense to me, to you. And that really helps me as a teacher think about what I'm going to do next, or the next lesson. So I want to stop right now and thank you so much for doing that. And the whole entire class was shocked. The student was shocked, but so empowered. And they were really excited by this whole conversation. It just kept moving and moving. So I think that's an example of allowing students to own that wonderful strength.
Wow. Okay, so that is a great example of, you know, just learning, and for myself, learning. I've been fortunate enough to learn so much from both of you. You both have helped me think about my leadership actions, about this topic, but so many more things, from how do we support teachers and how do we think critically about the work and so on. And so my next question, or our next question for you is, how do we help other leaders? What suggestions would you offer to mathematics leaders who want to pursue efforts for strength-based teaching and learning? Where might they start? One
of the things that we think that they can do is really focus on this deficit language, because people don't even realize how frequently we use it. And I know when I'm working with doctoral students, they'll say, well, I'm looking for teachers' lack of knowledge. I go, if you look for the lack of it, you're going to find the lack of it. Let's turn that deficit language around. And what do people know? What do students know? And so leaders need to, as they observe lessons, as they listen to classroom conversations, they need to make sure that they have this eye for turning things around to strengths-based. And that's not complicated. It's just a matter of careful, active listening. And this also requires that they ask teachers to possibly include in their lesson plans strength spotting, which we'll talk more about, I'm sure, where it's a conscious component in your lesson plan in the same way we always used to build in essential questions, a conscious plan at points to look, what strengths am I going to notice now? It's also going to be to include in parent-teacher conferences, start with strengths. We've done with that before, but let's do it differently. Be specific. What strengths in math do they have? And so I think that just turning this slightly to focusing more on that is a big deal. But here's the biggest deal. One of the things Beth and I have noticed, we actually had a book club we ran. It was a wild thing when the book came out, and Beth posted something and like 80 people responded, and they came every week practically. And what we found is what they're not good at is naming their own strengths in teaching math. And leaders could get on this fun activity of not only having teachers share what they think, because it's actually an action. It doesn't spill off their tongue. They actually have to think about it. And the principals could ask for that and add to it. I think that's very important. Teachers need a jump start sometimes, because it's hard work, and we all know that. And what do? We come home after and go, oh, that lesson just didn't go the way I wanted it to, instead of focusing on what was the best part of that lesson. And I think school leaders, coaches, principals, all the rest can be on the forefront of pushing that agenda.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm thinking about doing observations now with classroom teachers, and one of the conversations we have is, what are you working on? What do you want me to look for? But I think a question I'm going to insert right in front of that is, what do you do really well? What are your strengths in teaching math? So that's a great takeaway. I appreciate that.
Well, and even at the end of the lesson, once you have that, say, I have another to add.
That's
to
right.
That list of strengths you gave me before we even began.
That's right.
Yeah,
I think one of the big pieces of that is sometimes we ask that question and people just absolutely are stunned and can't ask. And so one of the ways we get around that, and this is something that we learn from this appreciative inquiry work, is that you can identify a strength by identifying something, a time, a moment, an experience when you were teaching, when you've just felt so energized. It's like that moment when you're teaching and it's crystallized for you, like, wow, look what's happening. And you it's almost, forgive me, it's almost an out of body experience, because you're looking around the room saying to yourself, look at what's happening. And it's not the whole lesson. It's just that moment, maybe when a student says something. And then what you do after that is you say, what was I doing? So we have to help people unpack their strengths by thinking about those moments. Then what was I doing right before that? And it usually has something to do with a question that was asked by the teacher, the task selected. Maybe it's the environment. The environment is open. Maybe it's the openness of the space for students to share ideas. Whatever it is, we have to sometimes dig a little bit to help people do that. So it's not just like this surface kind of, I'm good at building relationships. Well, how do you know that? Like, what does that mean for you? What does that look like for you? So really doing, working at that. And I think leaders can do so much to help foster that conversation, so that I run next door and I say, you're not going to believe what just happened. And it's a good story, not a bad story.
It makes me think of how when you work with teams, or teams of teachers, you're working with them to engage in really deep reflective practices.
Mhm.
Yet it's not just a reflection of what wasn't working, it was a reflection of what is working, and really taking those moments. And what you were describing to me, what came in my mind are those light bulb moments in the classroom where like the kids just get like really excited about something, and like I feel like a light bulb goes off, and I always wonder, well, what did I do, or what did they do to get to that moment? So what a great way to think about engaging those that you serve in that type of reflection. And that's kind of what brings me to the next piece of it. So you gave us some really good ideas around where to start. Well, we are currently in an interesting time in education, right? Lots of change this year, lots of challenges with just the pandemic and social unrest, all of the things going on in our world right now. What can leaders do to advocate for strength-based teaching and learning? Because listening to you all, I mean, we know that this is where we need more of this, right? To really support students and really empower students. So what are some things we need to do as leaders to advocate for this in our building or in our systems?
So this question keeps coming up because, I mean, let's look at what's happening really all around us, which is all about this deficit idea of learning loss and the different ways in which we're even describing how this is what's happened. And I'm not going to discount that this has been incredibly challenging in many, many ways. So I think one of the first things we have to do is just mimic what Karen just said about planning a lesson, but actually planning for how you are going to identify strengths. So that might be the fact that as you're planning this instruction, what is the instruction going to look like? How are teachers going to know that this is the ways in which they're going to operate, and students? How will students know that they're going to be looked at for their assets versus their deficits? Will they know that? We have to actually plan for that. And some of the ways that we can do that is to think about, is it really necessary? Are we going to be doing this tracking? Are we going to be positioning students with a belief mindset that they've lost so much that we're just going to have to, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to frighten the students because, you know, we've positioned it to be a lot of loss. But what if we plan to come in and say, we want to know all the stuff you did learn. We just really want to know that. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to take some time to find out all the things you did learn. And it's not just going to be, we want to know if you cooked or baked. We want to know about those kinds of things. We want to know if you did sidewalk chalk math. We want to know that. We want to know if you played games with parents and family members, cousins. We want to know those kinds of things, because guess what? That's all going to fuel the mathematics that we're going to do in the classroom. Because just because you may not have turned in a worksheet or whatever it is that you were supposed to have turned in does not mean you didn't learn mathematics. So planning for the celebration for what children have learned would be, I think, the first step. And then the other piece is really going to be taking ourselves to task about the language and making this common conversation around, if I use the word low, low babies, low students, you are to come up to me and you are to tell me you have my permission to help me reframe the language that I'm using, because it will influence the work that I do when I walk in the classroom and talk to people. I tell my students all the time, if I talked about you in a particular way and then I walked in the classroom to teach you, I would make different decisions. So I choose not to talk about you in a way that is negative. And I even choose not to think about you in that way. So I think that one of the things that we need to do is be super transparent about those actions that we're going to take, and then we got to hold ourselves accountable, because it's super easy to kind of fall down the path, because this is really hard work. It's really hard. And it's socially very acceptable to say, oh, you know, things are so hard. It's very socially acceptable. And it is a way in which we bond. Let's bond over the beauty and the strengths and the imaginations and the curiosity of our colleagues and the students that we teach.
Absolutely.
And from
I
what
think
Beth
we're done. That is fantastic.
It's true.
Amen.
I'm sorry, Karen, did you want to add
No,
something?
no. I'm just, thinking about what Beth is saying. And, we know that we can cultivate these things. And some of the things, or what we call our strength spotting, this looking for. But oftentimes in the past, we've not looked in the right places. And so in the past, we've assumed that strengths, our kids who get 100 on their multiplication fact papers, that those are your strongest math thinkers. And the fact is that we don't think that's true. Beth and I have beliefs that sometimes it's the kid who's distracted, not paying attention, fiddling with something in their desk, possibly talking to their neighbor, passing a note, or all of the rest because they're not engaged. And I don't mean not engaged that they couldn't be engaged. I mean that they're just, it's not interesting to them. And so we think that we should look for those students. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is that the University of Louisville was doing studies on, they'd swarm a school with a bunch of researchers with handheld devices, and they'd watch the way kids were behaving in a variety of subject areas, obviously math, one of the important ones. What they were doing was looking at it was a part RTI kind of model and a part positive behavior supports. Well, when did the kids misbehave and when did they get sent to referrals to the office? Funny, math time.
Oh, sad.
Yeah. And so what they found was that this is a time when kids were doing something else. And I think we all know that if I were given a worksheet with a bunch of, computation problems, I'd probably be passing notes to Beth in 10 minutes, maybe less. So, I think that we have to think of options for this. And this first, as Beth and I have said, first level of look at some of these kids that are distracted and see what we can do to, get them involved. Look for kids who like to do puzzles and are curious, as Beth said, playing games, doing riddles, things like that. Students who have creative answers are another avenue to, and I don't mean creative like something brilliant, I mean different thinkers. And I think that that's a group. We used to have some math clubs for kids after school. It was really, to be frank, to get girls involved. And what happened was all these kids showed up that we didn't even anticipate. And they said, well, I'm interested. I want to see what it is. And it cultivated a whole new crew. So I think there's a lot of room for that. And I think by going on an antiquated, and I'll use that word, approach of taking the kids with the highest scores and things and assuming that they are your strongest math students is a fallacy.
Yeah, so you talked about distractions and some of those behaviors. I thought you were talking about my experience in school there for a moment. I was passing the notes and what have you. So earlier,
How do you
Karen,
think I know about that?
Yeah. Well, anyhow, so Karen, you noted deficit language is a great challenge to this work. And then you referenced strength spotting. And as we just talked about, thinking about next year, whatever, strength spotting came up again. And one of the examples I think I heard you say was talking about looking for students who like to do puzzles or, certain things like that. And that strength spotting is more than a 94% on a test or something, right? So is there any other ideas or any other examples maybe that would help our listeners think about what it might look like in a lesson or anything like that? Just so we have a couple of ideas moving into the new year.
So there's so many different ways that you can think about it. It's about recognizing it. So for example, some things that let's take the student who has a representation that they love to use. And they use it for everything. The ones I'm talking about, they have this great thing and they apply it to everything. So that's an actual real strength. And often our thought is, wait a second, we need to get them off that representation and doing whatever else we've decided we wanted to do. But what if we sat down and we said, this is really interesting to me that you always, you could turn any problem into a number line. I'm fascinated with this. Tell me a little bit more about that. And if you go to where they are and then you ask a question about it and say, so let's think about, maybe we want to try a bar model. I wonder how a number line is like a bar model. Would you be willing to take your number line and let's use it there? So in other words, going down very specifically to the strategy or the idea that the student is using. And then you have to turn this question. It really means that we're listening and we're really paying attention. But that first act of saying, this is a real strength of yours, that you can use it, you can see how to use it, you use it all the time. It's really interesting to me, and I've been noticing that about you. That alone sets the course for this conversation that is mind-blowing. And I've watched it happen over and over and over again, where a student was literally staring at you, mouth hanging open. Are we having this conversation? Because usually somebody's telling me to stop doing that. So it's just reframing whatever you're seeing them do. I think the other thing is all of the mathematical practices that we see students do are other avenues for strengths. So the disposition. So it's not just about the knowing of math. And one of the things that we say all the time is identifying my strengths are not in comparison to Karen or John or Mona. They're just mine to own. I get to have them all by myself, not in comparison to someone else. So in our early work, we did ask teachers to identify strengths of students who may be struggling a lot, and they struggled to identify those strengths. And so we learned to say, don't compare the student to anyone else. Now look at that person as a human alone. What do you notice? And then the strengths come. So that's another technique to help us reframe it and be able to identify. I don't want to be compared to Karen Karp. I will lose all the time. So what I want
after that bio,
80,000 publications and all of that. But I do appreciate being seen for who I am and what I'm doing. And I think we all do. Who doesn't? Who wants to walk in a classroom? Which classroom do you want to walk in? Walk in a classroom where someone says, I see you. I see you. And I see what you bring to this classroom. And I know you. Or do I want to walk in a classroom where I'm being compared to other people and I'm going to fall short? I don't think so. So that little switch, just turning it around.
And Beth, as you talk, you make me think about sports and how we hear that all the times about athletes. And I don't want to be the next, I want to be the first me. And that as teachers, as professionals, as people, we subscribe to that in all walks of life. Why we haven't brought that into math yet. Well, maybe now's the opportunity.
Now's the time.
Now's the time, right?
And we need the teachers to be a team too. That's another whole layer of things where they work together on this and collaborate, make it happen.
I recently did an activity in my pre-service classroom where I asked them, they taught micro lessons to each other and they could only give strengths-based feedback to one another. No suggestions at all.
Nice.
And what became of that was that then they had to listen to the strengths-based feedback, identify something they wanted to improve and leverage their own strength. They had to figure it all out by themselves. Amazing reflections, amazing thoughtful ideas about what they did well. And they said, over and over again, talking about what I did well and having other people see that made me feel like I could do this, like I could be a teacher, which is, all we want.
Well, and I think that there's no doubt, Beth, by starting something like that when they're pre-service teachers, you're preparing them not to feel the burnout as many of us, feel when we are teaching that I just didn't do it, this, or I didn't do that. And that just wears down. And this kind of like renewal, like kind of fountain of youth you talked about there, is enough to give everyone energy to keep going and do the fabulous work that they can do.
As you guys are chatting about this, it's making me think of your mathematical identity versus your agency. And when students are embracing that self-talk around their own strengths, as well as when teachers embrace, as Beth was saying, embrace that language. Just think about the power of that language in terms of their own identity, and then in terms of what they can do with it. That's just awesome. So thank you guys. Yeah, go
And Mona,
ahead.
just one more thought. No, and you're making me think about a better normal. And I keep thinking that the conversation is let's return to normal. Can't wait to return to normal. And everything you talked about in this episode makes me think now is a great time to return to a better normal. And strengths and assets and all of these things are a great place for us to start next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both for your time today. We really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to hopefully when we can meet again in person, and I might have to like cringe on your shopping expedition, because if anybody knows me well, they know I love to shop.
Well, all are welcome. All are welcome.
You too, John.
That's right,
I might
John.
wait for you at the reception area.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Oh, thank you so much
It
for
was
having
so much
us.
fun talking to you. Thank you
Same
for
here.
including this topic.
Yeah.
We hope you have been inspired by this bold mathematics leadership conversation and will tune into our podcast series each month. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. You can learn more about NCSM, Leadership in Mathematics Education, and our upcoming professional learning events on the NCSM website at mathedleadership.org. You can also follow NCSM on Twitter at mathedleaders using the hashtag NCSMBold. Thanks again.